Okay, cool. It's 2 o'clock, so we'll kind of get started. I know some people are looking forward to seeing the disguise session at 3 o'clock, so I'm going to make every effort to tie this up before we get to 3. To improve on last week's feed, there were a lot of questions being asked sort of mid-session, and I couldn't really keep up very well with that and sort of talk and show you the bits that I wanted to. So my friend and studio mate Sam Lish is going to sit on the chat today. So if you've got any questions, Sam will either try and answer them, or he will sort of stack them up, and we'll have a chat about it at the end. So I think that's the housekeeping. Today's session is going to be about project setup in disguise. I've made this kind of fantasy stage design, which we're going to pick apart. We're going to set up all the LED, create UV maps, take those into Photoshop to create content templates. We've got projection screens left and right for iMag, which we're also going to have to UV map, take them into Photoshop, and then on into Disguise. So really the whole idea here is to build on last week's session. Last week's was kind of very theory heavy. We didn't do that much practical work. So hopefully just by going through and putting into practice the process of UV mapping, it might help fill in some gaps and maybe answer a few questions people might have had after last week. So yeah, off we go, I suppose. So as I said before, we've got a set of LED tiles which we've got on stage. We've got projection screens left and right for iMag. It's fairly simple setup. My screen's not shared. Thank you, Sam. That's awesome. That could have been really embarrassing. Cool. So hopefully what I've just described will make a little bit more sense to you now. We've got this fantasy stage setup, sort of stage design that I've done just for the purpose of doing this tutorial. We've got the LED set up on stage, and then the iMags left and right. So yeah, we're going to dig straight in and start to get this unwrapped. I've deliberately brought in a kind of painful 3D model for the LED. This is the kind of thing that I often see when I get sent show designs from production designers. They've pulled in the CAD that they've managed to get from the manufacturer, which is great and it looks interesting, but there's a lot of extra data in there that we basically just don't need when we're going to use this in Disguise. So also, although I may have at one point known exactly what this LED product is, we're going to give it we're going to call it it's a 2:1 ratio, and we're going to call it I think it's a 2:1 ratio. We should check that because it's going to cause us problems later if I'm wrong about that. So I'm just going to pop over here and grab a tape measure, turn 3D snaps on, make sure that I can snap to vertex. I'm going to come in and to make it easier for myself, I'm just going to turn hidden line on. That will allow me to see the edges of the model. So call that 0.6 if I snap that correctly. Let's have another look on the side here. No, I need to grab another tape measure. Call it 1200. So 2:1. I was right. A 2:1 ratio for the tiles. So if we call them, let's say 600 by 300 pixels per tile, and that we'll come back to that when we create our content maps. So these are, if I have a look in the sides, my center stage is one model, and then my side screens are all one model, and including all the backs and all the rigging and screen frames, which, as I mentioned before, is a lot more information than we're going to need for this, guys. So the easy thing to do, or the thing we're going to need to do to make this lighter on the server, is we're going to basically retop over the front of the tiles to make them a much simpler surface. In 3ds Max, the easy way, or the way that I would do this, is grab a line tool. I'm just going to grab the corners of each of these stacks. Oh, have I dropped that? Yeah, I've dropped it. Okay. We actually can't see the bottom of these tiles, which is kind of not that ideal. So let's just lose the stage for the moment while we're creating these. So yes, one way would be to grab a line tool and turn probably orthographic on, which is going to make it easier for us to zoom in. And then I'm just picking the corners of these towers. I've done it again. I've dropped it. We'll get there in the end. Ooh, that's a terrible one. Okay. This was supposed to be the easy bit. So a little bit more carefully this time. And when we get back to the top, we should be able, it should ask us if we want to close our spline. We say yes. So in doing that, we will have generated essentially just 4 edges. I can come up to my modify list here and say extrude face, or face extrude. And now if I just hide my side screens, we've got a flat surface that we can then take into, we can UV map this, take this into, create a content template and take this straight into Disguise. So that is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is if I grab my side screens, this really depends on how good the model is you've got from your production designer. But it might be that the model has a set of faces that you can select, which, let's just give it a line. So the first thing that I showed you with the line is if this was all subdivided and kind of a mess, then the only way to do really is to create the new screen for yourself. I wonder what this think about. But if you have got flat surfaces, it's probably easier and less time consuming just to be able to select the tiles. And this will become useful to us later, as we will we'll be able to show the edges of the tile when we create our UV map. So I just need to hide that. So here we're going to detach these from the model. These are going to be our stage light 3D. Here we go. And if I hide the side screens now, we just have the individual tiles marked out. And then if I hide the tiles, we've now got the backs, and we can export these and bring them into Disguise as props if we want to sort of show parts of the model that maybe aren't being used for video. the next thing to do, so there's a lot of rinse and repeat when it comes to working in sort of 3D. So basically, for the rest of the stage, we need to select all the tiles and detach them from the model so that we can use those in exactly the same way. If I'd been a little bit more organized when I was setting this up this morning, I might have detached these already, but hopefully give you a fairly good view on the kind of process that we'd have to do. This might be a good time if you've got any questions to ask them while I get this done. Okay, and then exactly the same process. We're going to detach these and call this main screen LED. Don't think about it. Cool. So exactly the same thing. We've got just the faces. We've accidentally grabbed a couple of extra polys that we don't need there. So, a few extra polys that we don't need there. Let's just clean this up so it makes it easier for us to work with when we get into UV mapping it. So I'm just going to grab the bits that we perhaps don't want. And lose the bits that we do. I'm just pressing delete on the keyboard to delete the parts that we're not interested in. Oh, we don't want to delete the LED face because we're going to need that later. And then Alt on the keyboard deselects using the lasso tool. So cool. So that's if we were more worried about what the model's going to look like that attaches to the back, then maybe we could have detached those and reattached them to the model. But I think we're going to be fine with that. So one more set of LED tiles to detach now. So that's the ones over here. It's going to be a stage left LED. Okay, perfect. So if I grab my main LED, so this is, if we hide the main screen, this is the set of tiles that we have in the center. I'm going to select them all, so Control A on the keyboard, and as we were doing last week, applying an unwrap UVW modifier. So right now, if I show you the UV panel, we're not seeing any valid UVs, which is quite good for this example. If I click the planar map, then we have to set the axis on which the planar map. So when we first clicked that, it was basically looking down on the model that way, which isn't going to give us the results that we want. By clicking this axis, it's looking to see which way the normals of each of these faces are pointing. It'll do that for the front. If I've done, say, Y, would do basically exactly the same. And if I press 1, let's have a little think. Autosave, okay, fair enough. I press 1 on the keyboard, it puts puts us into point mode, and we can basically just select a few points and confirm that our UV is correctly orientated. So if we're looking at the LED wall and the UV, the points that we selected are in the top left, and the same yellow points are over here. These aren't down here somewhere, which would show us that we had the orientation of the UVs flipped. So that is basically that is the UV map generated. We need to work out what resolution we need to render this at. And if I said we had each tile was going to be 300 by 600 pixels. Just going to do this for quickness. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 14, 15, 300. So that gives us the width of our map. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it's almost, but not quite a square, which we can kind of see visually as well. So there's our width and there's our height. I'm going to go to the render UVW template, and then where it says width and height, we're going to pump these numbers back in. So 4,500 width, and remind myself 4,800 for the height. If I hadn't made this information up with regard to the resolution of the LED, we'd be getting that from the manufacturer's website. So this is just a way of. What I'm going to do now is export this template. If we zoom in on this, you'll see each one of the tiles is showing us a green boundary edge, which will be useful later when we make our pixel map in Photoshop. So I'm just going to say main LED. 45, I think, 4,500 by 800. Okay. Cool. So that does a bit of saving. I'm also going to export this model that corresponds to that UV map. So if I go export selected, I'm going to put it in the same folder on my desktop. There's no OBJs in there yet, so I'm going to just call this main LED. So in your OBJ export settings, the things to note here: flip the X and Y axis. 3D Studio Max and D3 have opposite Y and Z axes. So that's important to check. You need to export your texture coordinates. Your normals and smoothing groups actually don't really matter. And the highest precision we can do is 12, so we want that. It's also important for the target to be PC Win. If you do Unix or Mac, that can cause some undesirable results. So just going to export that. Because I said export selected and not export all, we've just got our main LED screen there. So as I was saying before, it's all going to be pretty rinse and repeat. So I'm going to grab now my stage right LED. Now there's a few different ways that we could map this. We could subdivide it further, so we could just grab one column of these, and what we'd end up doing is if we separated these all out into their 10 separate parts, we'd be creating 10 separate render targets in Disguise, and then we'd potentially be asking our content team to create 10 separate bits of content as well. So that's not really ideal for anybody. We can, if I select all of those now, we could do the same thing that we just did with our main wall by creating a planar map, which actually, given given the way that they are, wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. So if I go unwrap UVW, applying the unwrap UVW modifier again, open UV editor, same as before, we have no valid UVs for these particular polygons. I say planar and then adjacent. That doesn't create too bad of a UV, to be quite honest. The important question that we have here really is how big should we render this? This is not just a case of counting pixels because we've got some gaps in between. The other thing is that our side models here are slightly rotated, and then we have a flat one at the top. So by getting, you can see the yellow line here of the planar map, we are, it might not be too obvious here, but these are probably going to be slightly different sized UVs. So the other thing which I touched on last week was we can do a spline wrap. So this would just be grabbing the corner points of each one of these LED towers. So now we have basically a line that tracks the rotation of each one of the towers, and go back into the stage right. Here we go. And if we go to our pick spline, and we set this to planar because these are flat surfaces, you can see now with the green lines how the texture is being sampled, the way that each one of the towers is facing. I often like to up the count on this a bit just to give it a bit more resolution. There's no real logic to that. Maybe I should try and do a multiple of the numbers of towers that I've got, but it's all to do with spacing this across the total linear space that we've got here. So if we pop back open our UV editor, this is, albeit although it's facing the wrong way, a much flatter, better way of representing our UVs because they've been properly sampled at the correct angle. We can see that that's not right. So we can just, now we've done this, I have to say commit, and now I'm able to transform this. So if we do that and one of these, I can just say this set of tools down here is actually not part of 3D Studio Max. It's a really great plugin called Poly Unwrapper. So if you specifically want to use 3D Studio Max, it would be worth having a look at Poly Unwrapper because it's I find it very difficult to use without at this point. I'm going to say fit. And now this visually looks very similar to the planar map that we generated before, but because of the way that we generated UVs using the spline map, we are guaranteed that the gaps and the way that these faces have been generated is totally perpendicular. So it's scientifically a better way to do it. We've scaled these up to the full height of the UV because we want our content template to fit our largest tower in at the top, and then everything else can essentially scale proportionally. So now all that's left to do really is to work out exactly what our pixel ratios are. So the height's pretty easy. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times 600 pixels. So let's go back calculator again. So 4200, which is going to keep it exactly the same pixel ratio as here. And then we need to basically make a calculation for what the width is here. So I'm going to grab the tape measure that you saw me use at the start of this tutorial. And so if I remember this correctly, this line is all perpendicular. I'll grab tape. Okay. So that is all one, so 3.991. Then we need this measurement, and then one of these, and we actually know that that's 60 centimeters, but oh, it would be 60 centimeters if I measured it in the right space. Okay, so we're going to pop back through our tapes and add them all up now. 3.991 plus 0.598. 0.934 plus 0.598. 6.121. Okay, so this gives us the linear length that we have here. We need to know what that is in, that's a size in meters, so we need to work out what that is in pixels. So if we go 600 millimeters or 60 centimeters is 300 pixels. So if we divide that by 300, we're going to get 2. So it's 2 pixels per millimeter. Oh, wait, it's quite a high res. It's cool. So let's take the number we first thought of: 6,121 millimeters divided by 2, and this is the size in pixels that we need to set our content template to be. So if we come back to here, we're 7 tiles high, and including the gaps in between the towers, 3,060 pixels wide. So coming back into our UV and wrap modifier, same as before, render UVW templates, and that's 3,060 and 4,200. So if we zoom in, we'll be able to see these, and we'll pick those up again when we get into Photoshop. So this is our stage right LED, which is okay. Oh, I need to set this to be oh, that's tedious. Stage right LED. I need to set this to be a PNG, otherwise it won't save out like it did just there. So there we go. One of the things that I know, because I've designed this stage, I'm just going to delete some of the tapes. Makes this look untidy. One of the things that I know, because I designed the stage, is that the towers left and right are an exact mirror image of each other. So, and we could prove that by measuring it, but I'm going to make this tutorial a little bit shorter by just telling you that. So if I grab our stage left LED, I'm going to show all the polygon faces there. We're basically going to do the same process that we did on this side, although now we have the added bonus of already knowing the maths involved in setting the pixel template correctly. So I'm going to go here, I'm going to add an UV and wrap modifier. No valid UVs for these polygons. as we did before, we're now going to create a new line, a new spline. Yep, that tracks the direction of each of these faces. Go back to our stage left LED, ramp modifier. Oh, grab that. And we can, if we pick spline, I can pick from here or I can pick from the list over here because I've got a couple of lines there. It's easier for me to pick here. Planar because we're flat, and I'm going to set that to 15, so it's the same as the other one. Interesting, the lines are facing the other way. But so we're going to commit that. And again, because we've committed that, we can now transform. So this time, we just modify it that way. Fit. And we already know the dimensions of this template. So that's 3060 by 4200. And those are the numbers that we calculated using the number of tiles and the height and the linear length between each of the towers when we did all our maths here. So that saves us a bit of time. Save that. Can use that name, but just modify the name to be, pause for autosave, modify the name to be stage left. And PNG. Cool, so that's saved the template out. What we didn't do when we were doing the stage right is save out our OBJ. So I'm going to go File, Export, Export Selected. And then this one is our stage left LED. Same settings as before, it just keeps the settings each time, and then we need to do the same to our stage right. Okay. So in terms of screens, we just have our iMac screens to set up. These are very easy because we know single projector is going to point at these, or maybe a pair of projectors stacked. But the resolution won't take much guessing. These are going to be HD. What's happened here? Our production designer, which case was me, has just used quite a flat cube here, which again, a bit like the LED, we don't need all the extra parts when we're bringing this into Disguise. So I'm going to grab our model stage left. I'm going to detach the front face. So now that's stage left iMac. Okay, so now that this is basically just a single polygon now. If I get rid of the background, you see there's no longer any thickness to that. Same as before, select the polygon that we're interested in, unwrap modifier, and because this was generated from a primitive, there's actually already a valid UV attached to this. If I press 1 to go into point mode, and then I've just selected that top left corner, and we get the yellow point here, which tells me that the UV is correctly aligned with the model. So our projector is going to be HD, 1920 by 1080, and the UV template. There's less of a need to actually render this out because we can create this very quickly in Photoshop, but for the sake of a thorough workflow, we'll do that. got to say PNG, give it a file type. Rinse and repeat on the other side of the stage for our stage right. So I have to stage right. I'm going to grab the front polygon, detach it. Give it a name. Select that polygon, UV unwrap modifier. So hopefully the whole point of this demo was there was a lot of repetition in terms of using the UV unwrap to generate various UVs and then therefore content templates. So unlike last time where I was dashing in and out of the UV editor, this is hopefully going to be a little bit more useful in terms of like understanding the proper workflow. So again, this would be exactly the same as the one we just created on the other side. So we could have just copied that file, but for the sake of making it a proper workflow, we're going to export this as well. This is our stage right to iMac, and that's going to be PNG. Okay. And as before, we need to export these models as OBJs. What I didn't do there is say export selected, so we do that. This is stage right iMac. Should turn autosave off for these demos, but it's a bit dangerous in case I don't turn it back on. Stage left, got to do exactly the same. So export selected. I'm just going to borrow that for the name. Make that stage left. Save that. Okay. So the last thing to do before we move out of 3D Studio Max is there's some extra bits in this scene that help us understand where we are on the stage, a bit like our performers, our drum riser, and our stage. So in Disguise, there is, let's delete some of these extra bits. There's a way to bring models in which aren't used for video output purposes, and we call those props. So what I'm going to do here is just export some of these extra bits so that we can make our Disguise project look a little bit more interesting. So prop stage, because I'm not going to be using these for video outputs and I'm not going to be applying a texture to them, I'm not going to UV map them, and we'll sort of see when we get into Disguise why that kind of doesn't really matter. If we wanted to, we could bring all the LED frames in. For me, personally, I think that is kind of unnecessary. Let's bring these performers I stole from the Disguise toolkit, so they're actually already available to us in Disguise. So maybe we'll just grab them directly once we get in there. So I think that's probably everything that we need to do in 3ds. I'm just going to save this project, so if we need to come back to it, we don't have to redo anything. So now, to kind of prove the theory in terms of sort of validate the UV maps that and the models that we've created, let's bring them into Disguise. So here is D3 Manager on the latest goal for Disguise. To create a new project, I'm going to say File, New Project, project, whatever you like. In order to bring, so we went through this last week, in order to bring external objects into your disguise project, you can right click and open project folder. Then all of our external data lives in the objects folder. Particularly the ones that we're going to look at today is the mesh folder. To keep things tidy, I tend to create a folder that just houses all the default bits that you get sort of with your default disguise project. And then I'll separate my screens, and then once more my props. There's no functional reason why you have to do it this way. For me, it's just a case of keeping things tidy. A tidy workflow will help you when things get sort of busier on site. So I've given these, when I saved the props out, I gave them prop on the front of their name to help me find them. So that's kind of useful. And then the rest of the ones, these are all the LED models that we just generated. Go on screens. So the last thing to add before we actually open Disguise is our content maps. I normally call these input maps. So this is the way that our content providers will be generating the content. So they all just get copied in there. So that should be enough for us to get going. Just going to open Disguise. In order for you to be able to see this, I've got my machine settings for Disguise to be running in windowed mode. If I hadn't, I'm not exactly sure how Zoom would perform in terms of being able to see the screen. So that's why that's doing that. I'm going to get rid of our default projector and our default projection surface, and then we can start building our scene. This guy's called a puck, and we're just going to get rid of him for the moment. Maybe we'll bring him back later. So for our props, if I go to venue, currently there's no venue. We're going to generate our own venue, which I've just called stage. And then we just need to give a name to each of the props that we want to use. So here's our mesh. I'll go to my props folder, prop stage. There we go. And we can do the same with our drum riser. There we go. I'm not particularly worried about applying a texture to these, which is why I didn't bother UV unwrapping them. But if you wanted to make your stage, you know, a nice wooden texture, then you would need to unwrap them in order to make that work. I'm going to turn the floor off because it's intersecting our stage, and our stage essentially becomes our floor. So I can do that by right-clicking and go to visibility, appearance. Here we go. So floor. Let's find these ones. Also, to make things look a little bit nicer, turn on the ambient occlusion. I'm going to make this our lux renderer. Makes things a little bit on the dark side, so we just increase our background color for the moment. Okay. So now for the interesting bit, we're going to add our the screens that we just generated. So let's start with the main screen. Go to my screens folder, main LED. And there we go. We need to set the resolution of this screen, which is the resolution we worked out when we created our content template. I can't remember that, but one of the reasons why I set the name of the content template to have the pixel size in is I can just reference that there. So 4500 by 4800. There we go. That's correctly mapped. Let's just rename that to keep things tidy. Then stage left. Same for this. So stage left LED, and then we need to add the corresponding model into our stage menu. So if I remind myself using 360 by 4200, and then I'm going to come on here 3060 by 4200, and moment we haven't got the right model, so this is a stage left LED. I should just have to confirm the mapping type on this one. That's been sent to the main, so let's save that to our stage left, and we can see oh crumbs. Not seen this guys do that before. Okay, let's just quit out and pop back in, see what's going on there. Cool. Okay, not sure what happened there, but even the best software has a bug or two. So rinse and repeat for our stage right LED. So add our stage right model, and that's going to be the same resolution as this guy over here. So like 3060 by 4200. And we can duplicate the content module and change our mapping. Doesn't look quite the way we expected. Let's just confirm that's stage right. Stage right. Let's try and put something slightly more obvious on that too. Strange. Okay. Well, we're gonna once we finish here, we're gonna pop into Photoshop and generate some much better pixel maps. So yeah, there we go. Last few things to add are stage right, OMAG. We know this is going to be 1920 by 1080. If we pan out a little bit, oh. Because we're in Lux, it's not showing me anything because I'm not projecting anything on it. So we could do and then we would need to show a projector pointing that. Or if we didn't want to go through that, we can just set this to schematic. Oh, that's a little bit bright. And then we would get to see that because Lux is, as well as being able to make our renderer look a lot nicer, it's also a tool for projection studies. So that was basically showing me there that I had no projectors pointed at that particular screen. One more stage. I'm doing this a little bit backwards. creating the module to hold the pixel map, and then select the model from the mesh menu, and yeah, we'll just set our mapping. Cool. Okay. So in terms of like our output feeds, we've got our main LED, stage left and stage right LEDs. If we added some projectors, so to say we're interested in stage left. Square this out. Lens a bit wider. Okay, so it's a little bit on these. So yeah, perfect. And then we could do the same for stage right. So just duplicate that projector, and then I can say it's the same values but minus on the X. That's just going to flip it over there. And if I was doing this for real, I'd tidy that up a little bit better. But that just goes on to show that we kind of have everything working. Going to remove active surface from stage left, and we're going to make that stage right. So in our feed outputs, we've got each of the surfaces that we generated when we're in 3D Studio Max. So the last part of this was going to take our pixel maps and turn them into something a little bit more interesting that we perhaps send a content supplier. I realised it's already 5 to 3, so for those people who want to make the disguise session, we're probably going to run over. But I'm going to plough on through, and certainly won't be offended if anybody needs to duck out. So here we go. Let's just fly through this fairly quickly. Because we've output our content template to the right resolution with the tiles put in, there's the tile edges annotated in there. It's going to be very, very trivial in Photoshop to turn these into something a little bit more useful. I'm going to open our main. So this will come in transparent with the tile edges as green lines. What I tend to like to do is just set a fill layer as a background, maybe something a little less garish than that red, and that gives us you know, it makes it a little bit clearer for what we're doing. Normally when I'm working with LED tiles, I tend to use a pattern to generate the tile, as that makes it much quicker. We could, if I had the time and the interest, could go through and sort of colour in our tiles like that. But yeah, really, who has the time for that? So just going to generate. Here I'm going to do twice 2 tiles worth of width and then 2 tiles worth of height, and that will allow us to create a checker pattern. So with the tiles being 300 pixels wide by 600 pixels high, that would be 600, 1200. And then I'm going to use Photoshop's built-in rectangle tool. If I just click once, that will allow me to generate a rectangle 300 by 600. So that's a single LED tile. If I set over here the edge to be white, I now have one pixel line all the way around the edge to show me the edge of the tile. And when you're actually on site checking to see if your map's correctly fitting the LED, checking that the white line is at the edge of the tile is quite a nice way to work that out. I'm going to duplicate that layer and stick one in the corner. Like I say, we're generating a checker pattern here. We'll take a third one and make that some kind of a complementary color. Red and green, why not? I'm not sure if that's complementary. One more duplication, and we'll stick that in the corner. Right, if I select all of that, there we go, and now I can go to Edit, Define Pattern. Why is that just selecting the Edit, Define Pattern, and give this a name or not, it's kind of up to you. But then when we go back into our pixel map over here, I can do layer, fill layer, pattern. Here's our pattern 1, perfectly with the white lines. So if I do that, there'll actually be a 2 pixel line where 2 giant tiles join. We get a 1 pixel line at the edge. Control 0 to take me out to the full view. And then I tend to just label up my pixel maps. So I'd say something like main LED. I'd give it a size, which is 4500 by 4800. Just center those out. Export that. We can do essentially the same for our ones on the side. It's the pattern for fractured LED. So let's open, this is our stage left. We go layer, new fill layer, and solid color to give ourselves a background. Again, something slightly less painful on the eyes. With something like this, although a pattern would work, you then have to sort of go through the process of masking it all. In my opinion, this is where just using a paint bucket would actually probably just be a lot quicker. So we're going to do that. With something like this, I'd be more likely to just maybe number my columns as there's not really enough room to put any sort of details on. Make this white and duplicate that. keep going until we've done them all. Control J on the keyboard, duplicate a layer, and I'm using T to select that and change the number once more. Control J, and then V allows me to pick that up and move it. T to modify the text. We've got a layer here that's snuck in. Right, export. So I'm just going to grab these two, take them back into Disguise. So objects, video file, I'll add them into here. Just reload that. Here we go. So here's my content modules. I can swap these out for the ones without pixel maps in. If I go to stage left LED, there we go. I'm not going to go back through and do every single one, otherwise you're going to spend a lot of time watching me do the same thing for no real gain. It will be rinse and repeat to make that happen on the stage right LED. And then Disguise comes with HD test patterns. We have these guys, the color bars, or just sort of a more traditional 16:9 test pattern. So we could use those, or we could make our own with our show name and logo. Perhaps that'll be a tutorial for a different day. One last thing, I did say I was going to bring our band back in using the Disguise models. So I grab a drummer. So I'm just creating a new prop. Mesh, and the folder that I created with all the Disguise models in. He's going to come back in slightly below the stage, so I can just use my transform properties here to sit him on the drum riser. And I could do that sort of rinse and repeat again for you know, the rest of the band. We do a singer. Same again with the transform. We'll make sure that his legs aren't transecting the stage. So here we go. I hope you've enjoyed that tutorial. I'm going to try and work out how to have a look at some of the chat. Chat, okay, very good. Check. I think Sam might have got you covered. Cool. Okay. I think we're going to make that the end of today's session. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to leave a comment on the Facebook group if you've got any subjects that you want us to cover. And until next Friday, take it easy. Thank you very much.